Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we are diving into some seriously cool materials science. We're going to find out how researchers are using what you could call molecular stitches to make something as squishy and wobbly as Jell-O unbelievably strong. So let's jump right in.
I mean, seriously, think about it. How would you even do that? It sounds like a totally bizarre party trick, right? Gluing two wet, wobbly cubes of Jell-O seems pretty much impossible. But believe it or not, this simple question is actually at the very heart of a massive challenge in things like modern medicine and even soft robotics.
See, scientists aren't really playing with dessert. They're working with something called hydrogels. Now, these are basically networks of polymers that are full of water, a lot like Jell-O, yeah? But they're being engineered to mimic human tissue for some absolutely incredible applications.
So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we're going to tackle the main challenge of making these soft things stick. Then, we'll check out a super clever new way researchers came up with to test them. We'll get into the secret of stitching molecules and see the incredible results. We'll also uncover a surprising weakness, and finally, we'll wrap up with why all of this matters for the future.
Okay, so why is this so tough in the first place? Well, hydrogels are fantastic for things like advanced wound dressings or as scaffolds to help regrow tissue, precisely because they're soft and our bodies don't reject them. But that same squishiness makes them a nightmare to bond together. Your typical superglue just isn't going to cut it here. And you know, there's an even bigger problem. Let's say you do get them to stick. How do you actually know how strong that bond is? The old school methods, like just peeling them apart, are super misleading. Most of the energy you measure is just the energy it takes to stretch the hydrogel itself, not the energy it takes to actually break the bond. So you end up thinking the bond is way stronger than it really is, which is obviously a huge roadblock for making progress.
So, to get around this, a team of researchers at the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth had to basically go back to the drawing board. Before they could even think about making a stronger bond, they had to invent a whole new way to measure its true strength, a way to filter out all that interference from the material's stretchiness.
And their solution was just brilliant. Look at this. They created these custom T-shaped pieces of hydrogel. This special shape is key because it lets them grip the pieces and pull them apart in a really controlled way, which focuses all the force right where it matters, on the seam where they're bonded together.
And they didn't stop there. They built two custom testing rigs. The one on the left pulls the pieces straight apart. That's called mode I. But the one on the right is where it gets interesting. It pulls them apart while also sliding them sideways. That's a mixed mode test. This let them see how the bond held up under different kinds of stress, the kinds of stress it would actually face in the real world.
Okay, so they've got their new, reliable way to test the bond. Now it's time for the main event, actually making that bond crazy strong. And their secret weapon? It turns out it's a natural polymer that acts like a microscopic needle and thread. Right, the fancy scientific name for this is topophesion, but a much cooler way to think about it is as molecular stitching. Or maybe even like microscopic Velcro. You're basically using these long, stringy molecules to physically weave two different surfaces together, creating this one super tough, integrated bond. It's pretty amazing. So how did this actually work? Well, the researchers used something called chitosan, which is a polymer you can actually get from shrimp shells. They put a solution of it between two pieces of hydrogel, and these long chitosan chains just naturally wiggle their way into both sides. And as you can see in this diagram, the longer chains, the ones with a high molecular weight, create a way denser, more tangled network. They are literally stitching the two pieces into one. So now they have their new testing rig and their molecular stitches. It was time to put it all to the test. And the results they got from those pure pulling experiments? They were, well, absolutely dramatic. Just take a look at this chart. The control sample on the left with no stitches at all had a fracture toughness of about 5.2. But look what happens as they use longer and longer chains of chitosan. That's what KDA or kilodaltons measures. The toughness just skyrockets all the way up to 15.7. And that's really the headline here. The longest chain chitosan created a bond that was a whopping 200% tougher than the sample without it. I mean, they didn't just glue Jell-O together, they made the seam itself incredibly strong. They also figured out that the chemical environment made a big difference. A less acidic solution, that's a pH of 4.5, was the sweet spot. It allowed those chitosan stitches to form the best possible network, which totally maximized bond's toughness. But you know, science is rarely that simple. Just when it looked like they had totally cracked the code, their second testing rig, the one that added that shearing sideways force, revealed a really surprising twist in the tale.
So let's just quickly remember the two forces. Mode I is that clean, pure pull, kind of like opening a book. Mixed mode adds that sliding or shearing force, which is way more common in the real world, like the forces on a twisting knee joint or a bending robot arm.
And here was the big surprise. When they put the bond under those mixed forces, the super strong bond was, well, suddenly not so super. The toughness only went up by about 65% compared to the control. I mean, that's still an improvement, but it's a far cry from that 200% jump they saw before. So what on earth was going on?
The researchers figured out the answer was in this really fascinating mechanical phenomenon. It all came down to something called crack tip blunting, which is basically a fancy way of saying how the material fights back against a tear at the microscopic level.
These strain maps here are amazing. They show exactly what's happening. In the pure pulling test, you can see that the dense web of chitinous and stitches actually rounds off or blunts the sharp tip of a crack as it tries to form. This spreads the stress out over a wider area, which makes it way harder for the tear to rip through. But for some reason, that sideways shearing force in the mixed mode test seems to stop this blunting effect from happening, which lets the crack just slice right through the bond much more easily.
So, discovering both the strengths and this unexpected weakness is a massive step forward. This isn't just some abstract lab experiment. This is the kind of fundamental research that really paves the way for some truly futuristic technologies.
I mean, just think about the possibilities. Stronger medical glues that actually hold firm inside the human body. Wound dressings that basically become a second skin. Scaffolds that can help your own body regrow cartilage or even parts of organs. Or how about more durable and agile soft robots? Understanding exactly how to make and test these bonds is absolutely crucial to making any of this a reality.
And that leaves us with one last pretty fascinating thought. This entire breakthrough came from chitosan, a material that's just found in shrimp shells. It really makes you wonder, right? What other incredible secrets are just hiding out there in nature, waiting for us to discover them and engineer them into the technology that will build our future?